I have been lucky enough to have worked with Jamie Dingler for quite some time, starting at Network for Good. She and I worked together on webinars, and we've brought her back into the Bonterra ecosystem because she is the absolute best. Probably overdue, but we're really excited to have her back now. And for those of you who aren't familiar, let me introduce you to Jamie, who is a CFRE and founder of What's Good LLC. What's Good is a nonprofit fundraising and marketing consulting firm based on Maryland's Eastern Shore. She is a passionate advocate for small and growing nonprofits and has transitioned from board member to development director, where she tripled her organization's revenue in 3 years. And in 2021, she was driven by a desire to support even more organizations. We just talked about Jamie saying yes to a lot of things. There's a theme here. Really, she is committed to helping. That's when she launched What's Good LLC. And in that same year, she published the itty bitty book for nonprofit fundraising, a practical guide for board members, navigating fundraising. And I've heard from a bunch of folks on our webinars who've actually gone and gotten the book, and they're like life-changing. So it's awesome. She earned her CFRE certification and then recently launched What's Good Wednesday, which is a weekly newsletter celebrating nonprofit success and offering fundraising insights. So we've got a pro with us here today. Jamie's board sessions quite literally always hit. So you're in for a treat, and I will let her take it from here. Thank you so much for being here.
Awesome. Hi, everybody. That was no pressure after that introduction. No pressure. No, it's so great to be here today. It's nice to see where everybody's from. I'm actually joining you from the beautiful Eastern Shore of Maryland. I saw there was at least one other person there from my neighboring town, which I was really excited to see. But it's so cool to see people from all over the country. It just is such a neat thing to be able to be speaking with you all today. So today, we're going to talk about one of my very favorite subjects, which is getting your board on board with fundraising. Not so easy sometimes, we think, but we're going to try and break it down. Amanda already talked a little bit about what I do. My company's called What's Good LLC. I am a board member turned marketing and development director turned nonprofit consultant. And I wrote the itty bitty book of nonprofit fundraising to make it super simple. We're going to talk about the first half of our meeting today is going to be the stuff that's in the book and just breaking it down to the fundamentals of what the board needs to know about their role in fundraising. I do have What's Good Wednesday, which is a weekly newsletter. At the end of the webinar, we'll talk about how you can sign up to get it delivered to your inbox. But also, if you want to submit your good news, that's the point of it, is to celebrate good news from the nonprofit world. The reason I started that is because when I was development director, we never stopped to celebrate. There's so much good work that you're doing, but there's so much more work that comes behind it. And we never took the time to just sit in our successes. And I think that's so important to helping to avoid burnout, is to really sit and celebrate what you've done and look at how far you've come as often as possible. So that's What's Good Wednesday. And of course, my goal is always just to make fundraising a little less scary for everybody and show you it's not what you necessarily think it is. It can be easy, it can be accessible, it can be comfortable, and so that's just my goal, is to help you get your board ready to fundraise and excited about fundraising. So we'll see if we can make that happen. All right, so just the very basics. Your nonprofit board has two main functions: governance and fundraising. Most boards are all about jumping in and helping with governance, how's the organization run, the structure, all of that good stuff. When it comes to fundraising, there are reasons for this. I think we give it the short shrift. We're not really approaching it properly when we're recruiting board members. We also don't approach it in a way that feels good to most people. And so that tends to be something where board members back off, unless they're crazy people who love asking people for money, which you do run into every now and then, but they're few and far between. So we're going to start off with a little question in the chat. First, just a show of hands. How many of your board members love to fundraise? How many people out there have board members that are just like all about fundraising? None so far. 0. 1. All right. 3 of 19. Yep, 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 yep. Maybe 1. Love is a stretch. That's fair. A few limited to grants. 6 to 7 is great. Okay. 0 out of 30. Jess, we got to do something about that. Okay, so yeah, I mean, the numbers aren't great. We weren't expecting them to be. That's why we're sitting on this webinar today. What are the most common reasons that they tell you that they don't like to fundraise or don't want to fundraise? No time? Uncomfortable, yep. I don't know how. It's scary asking people for money. Yeah. Might offend people, comfort level. They don't like hearing no, that's fair. It's scary. My network is tapped out. That's interesting. Burnout. Yeah. Unsure of what to ask for. Okay. Yeah. Don't know who to ask. Okay, yeah, that's all fair. That's all fair. A lot of that is we have to open up our minds too, right? When we think about fundraising, we're going to talk about that in a few slides here, what fundraising actually is. And when you look at what fundraising, oh, Nicole, no, no. She said she's recently started hearing it's the executive director's job. No, no, no. Let me come and set them straight. No, no, no. Uh, it's not the executive director's job. It's not the development director's job. It's everybody's job. It's leadership's job. And again, this is a function of how we're approaching it. So first, we're going to talk about the fundamentals of fundraising, what fundraising really is, what it looks like to approach your board and involve them in a way that feels good for them. And then we're going to talk about the documents and the policies that you can start putting in place to really start creating that culture of fundraising within your organization. So, first off, things that do not absolve your board members of their duty to fundraise. Everyone loves when I pull this slide up at a board training session. Sorry, guys. Nice try. Haha, foiled again. All right. Here we go. So, number 1 is hiring a development director. The development director, yes, is obviously going to be heavily involved in fundraising. But their job is really to help create a strategy and help implement that strategy. That doesn't mean there aren't things that your development director obviously is going to do towards fundraising that fall directly on their shoulders and not on the board's shoulders. But the development director, it is not their job to raise all of the money that your organization needs to function. It just isn't. Having a development committee is also not a reason for the rest of the board not to be involved in fundraising. The development committee is not the fundraising committee. The board is the fundraising committee. This is super important. The development committee helps with strategy. They help with involving and motivating the rest of the board, setting goals. They find places where board members can fit in to the development plan for the year, but they are also not in charge of doing all of the fundraising. They might take a larger role than some of the other board members, but everybody has to participate. Making a big donation is also not a good reason. How easy is it to leverage your big donation to encourage other people to give? Like, it doesn't even really take a lot of extra effort to even if you're making a big donation, even if you're really busy, to make a strategic decision to help leverage your generosity to encourage other people to be generous. And we can talk about that a little bit further down the line. Having a time-consuming role on the board is also not something that absolves you of your duty to fundraise. There are ways that you can participate that don't take a lot of time, they don't take a lot of effort. You still have to do something. It's your job as board members to make sure that the organization has the resources that it needs to fulfill its mission. And so they have to participate in some way. So this is a big one. Board members must make an annual donation. There are a couple of really big reasons for that. One is a lot of grantors will ask what percentage of your board gives to your organization. And if the answer is less than 100, think about it from the funder's perspective. Why would I give money to your organization? Why would I put skin in the game when your own leadership doesn't have skin in the game? Does your leadership not believe in your mission? Why is your leadership not supporting what you're doing, right? So you can see the domino effect that that has and how that would be really off-putting to a potential funder. It's the same thing when you go out into your community. How can you go out in your community and ask them to support something that you yourself are not supporting? So it is extremely important that every board member makes an annual donation. And no, it can't be $1 just to say you did it. I have actually heard of a board chair that has said that to the board. The steam that came out of my ears when I heard that was said in a board meeting. No, it really should be a stretch gift. I'm not a big fan, especially with small and growing organizations. People are not on the board because they have big pockets. They're on the board because they have talents and connections and there are other reasons why they've been chosen on the board. They're not necessarily valuable because of the number, the total of their checkbook. So this should be a stretch for the individual board member, what is meaningful to them based on their personal financial situation. I don't like the everybody gives $10,000 or gets $10,000. I'm just not a fan of that. That might work with the larger boards, but in your small and growing organizations, it's just not feasible for a lot of people. You might put off people who can't afford to give that much, and you also maybe are lowballing people who can afford to give more. So just make sure they understand this is something that should be significant to each board member. Oh gosh, the board has to trust the development person. They're not making it up. That's the number one thing. And, I spend a lot of time as a consultant really just being that third party to come in and tell everybody what they've been hearing from their development person for a year or two and just ignoring. Sometimes it's really hard. It depends on if people don't really understand what fundraising is, what it means, what's expected of them, they're gonna be hesitant to say they want to do it. And that means finding any reason why they can't do it, right? So that means saying that the development person is wrong when they listen to a webinar by an expert and the expert says, you should be doing this, this, and this. And then they say, okay, board, we need to be doing this, this, and this. And they say, no, we're not doing that, right? So trust that person. Any good development director is not pulling it out of thin air. They're getting it from the experts. They're getting it from best practices. The other thing that we talked about before, it is not the development director's job to raise 100% of your organization's fundraising goal. And the third thing that is so important, I should put a fourth thing on here. Give your development director the support that they are asking for. Development is a job with a lot of different buckets. It is something that is extremely stressful. If anyone, I used to be the development director for a homeless shelter, and I can tell you every day I thought, if we don't hit our fundraising goal, people will be homeless. And I put that squarely on my shoulders. It is high pressure. It's very stressful. You're doing the job of multiple people. If they are asking for support, give it to them. You will raise more money that way. So that's the thing that's not on there, but I think I'm going to add that next time I give this presentation. But this is so big because it leads into this next one. There's a lot of turnover in development. That's why I'm saying support your development person. It's not a job that a lot of people can stay in long term because it is so high pressure. And if they're not getting the support that they need, they might choose to step away. If that happens, you do not want your development person to be the only person who owns your donor relationships. You don't want your development person to be the only person that is stewarding your donors. What happens when your top donors don't hear from anybody? They're not getting the same level of attention. They're not being informed of the impact of their donations. It's so important that the board gets involved, key staff gets involved. Those donor relationships, every donor should have at least two contacts within the organization that they feel comfortable with, that if they heard from that person, they would be excited to hear from them and find out what's going on at the organization. So this is so important. This goes along with trusting your development director, but also make sure they don't own everything, because if they walk away with all your donor relationships, you're going to be in a world of trouble. So let's talk about, this is the big catchphrase that I use in my book. Fundraising is not about asking people for money, which feels very counterintuitive, but I liken it to going with your hand out versus going for the handshake, right? Fundraising, I mean, you can ask people for money and that's fine. And you will likely get some money, but if you're not making it personal, if you're not building a relationship between your donor and your mission, if they don't feel invested emotionally in what you are doing, then they are less likely to give again. They're less likely to give more, right? When somebody feels emotionally invested in what you're doing, um, when they feel like they are part of fulfilling the mission, they want to continue seeing that work being done. They want to continue having that feeling of, look at what I have helped accomplish, right? So I know, like, the way we normally approach fundraising and think of fundraising is as a transaction. That's why people, when they say, I don't want to ask people for money, I don't feel comfortable asking people for money. Let me tell you something. I hate asking people for money. Hate it, hate it. Don't like it. It stinks. I am not a fan. But what I do love is telling people about things that I am passionate about. And the effect is the same. Actually, it's probably better because I can see when people are listening to me talk about something that I'm excited about, they start to get excited. They want to know how they can get involved in that thing, right? And so fundraising is much more about building those relationships, getting people excited about your mission. You're going to have a much deeper interaction, a much deeper investment than just here's $30, go away, right? You're going to have here's $30 a month, and then oh my gosh, my $30 a month is really making a difference. I think I'm going to raise it to $50 a month. And then, you know what? This organization, I want to see it go on. I'm going to put them in my will. So you see how this snowballs. So when you look at fundraising as transactional, as relational instead of transactional, this opens up an entire world of possibilities that I guarantee you your board is not thinking about. When you ask them to fundraise, they're thinking, oh, I see in the chat, if you don't ask, you don't get. Yes, absolutely. Somebody's got to ask, right? But it doesn't start with the ask. It starts with a touch. The touches are what get people ready to say yes when they are finally asked. The board does not have to be the askers. They need to be the ones that are helping build the relationships so that somebody else can swoop in and make the ask. And once a donor is ready, it could take a social media post asking, It could take an email blast asking. It could take an appeal letter asking. It doesn't have to be some big production to make the ask. If somebody is super invested in what you're doing emotionally, they'll be ready when the ask comes. So that's what I'm saying. Yes, of course there has to be an ask. But when it comes to your board, they don't have to be the ones asking. So, what I mean by this is, okay, fundraising is not one size fits all. This is the other thing I say all the time in my book. I talk about it all the time. It's so important. Another thing I'm not a fan of, besides everybody give or get $5,000 or whatever it might be, is everybody sell 50 tickets to our next event, or everybody bring 10 people in for a tour, or everybody go ask 5 people to be business partners. You have to think about your board members. Every single person that comes on your board is a human being. First and foremost, they have different schedules. They have different social comfort levels. They have different comfort levels approaching people for money. They have different talents and passions. They have different energy levels. You can't ask every single person to do the exact same thing. What you're going to get is a bunch of people that feel extremely uncomfortable doing the thing that you've asked them to do and therefore are not going to do it. So, the way to approach fundraising is to find ways for your board to participate that feel comfortable for them. So, I'm going to give the example of an event. This is kind of my favorite example to give. This shows you how everybody in your board can work as pieces of a whole to pull off a successful fundraising event. Okay, so maybe you have someone on your board who has tons of energy. They're retired, so they have lots of time. They are raring to go. They don't mind asking people for money. They don't mind delegating. They're raring to go. They would be happy to be your event chair, right? Maybe you have some other people who don't have as much time. Maybe they need some guidance, but they want to help plan the event so they can go on the event planning committee. Maybe you have somebody on your board who's a worker bee and they just really need to be set off on a task and they will do it. So that person could be your runner leading up to the event, getting set up for the event, helping organize the volunteers or the food or whatever during the event. They just need a task. They want to get set in a direction, they'll go, they'll run with it. Maybe you have someone on your board who is a social butterfly, and that person is your schmoozer during the event, going up to everybody, thanking them for coming, asking them if they have any questions about the organization, introducing them to staff members and other board members. That person can be a schmoozer. Maybe you've got somebody on your board who can buy 3 tables and fill them up with potential donors and sit there and steward those donors during the event, make sure they're paying attention during your mission moments and telling them how much this organization means to them. Maybe you have somebody who can't attend the event or doesn't have a lot of time to be involved, but they would be happy to. Most important thing, keeping people engaged after the event. They would be happy to sit and write handwritten thank you notes to everybody who attended, thanking them for coming, telling them how much was raised, telling them where their money is going to go, inviting them for a tour, thanking them on behalf of the board of directors. So you see, and there are other things that I'm not even mentioning here, but you see how everybody has their own unique situation, their own unique energy levels, their own comfort levels. They can all work together as a team to pull off your event. Now, I'm just talking about events here, so you can see how this can extrapolate, though, to your overall development plan for the year. If you work with your development committee, or if you don't have a development committee, if you're a development person and your executive director or your board chair, sit down and figure out, okay, here's the overarching plan for the year. Where do we need our board members to plug in? Then, when you're talking to the board members, you can ask them where they want to plug in that feels good for them. If they're committing to doing things that they feel comfortable with, they're so much more likely to follow through with those commitments than if you're just coming down from on high saying, I need everybody to do this, this, or this, right? You can say, I need volunteers to do this, but saying, everybody do this, probably no one's going to do it. Just to be, I mean, we've seen it in action, so I don't think anybody doubts what I'm saying here. So fundraising is not one size fits all. Once you start implementing your fundraising in this way, you're gonna see things start to come together. The other thing that's really important too is just because somebody has made a commitment to you, and if they're not doing it, it doesn't mean they don't intend to. It doesn't mean they're horrible people. They need stewardship and guidance just as much as any other volunteer or donor. They need your help in facilitating whatever it is they have committed to do. So I can tell you, when I was a development director, I had a very active board, and that was because they knew if Jamie called, they better get their stuff done, because I'm going to keep calling them until it gets done and asking them, what do you need from me? What can I do to make sure that you follow through on your commitment? So that is the other thing that is really important. Don't just write it down and then set it and forget it. You've got to follow up and say, hey, you committed to doing these 3 things. What do you need in order to make these happen? How can I help? All right, so magically now we've had this conversation with our board. Everybody's on board with fundraising. They understand it. Now what? Everybody's read the itty bitty book. They get it. Now what? Well, there are a few things that you should start codifying to start putting a culture of fundraising in place for your organization. So it's important, once you have this conversation, that you don't have to have this conversation every single year as your board turns over. This is something where everybody should know what their expectations are coming into your fiscal year. Everybody should know, this is what I've got to do. This is my job. So there are a few things that you should have in place. First is a board roles and responsibilities sheet, a board fundraising policy, and then of course your development plan. These are all things that should be in writing. Your board roles and responsibilities and board fundraising policy, they should be presented to your they should be presented to your prospective board members before they join the board. This is so important. Let us not do the conversation with the prospective board member and conveniently leave fundraising out of the conversation. It should be a very prominent part of the conversation. They should get these board roles and responsibilities and the board fundraising policy, and they should know this is what is going to be expected of me. So what I mean is, right, we don't say, oh, you got to do this, 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 and this, and fundraising, right? It's as long as you explain what fundraising means. What is relational fundraising? What do we mean when we say that? What are examples of what we mean when we say we need you to participate in fundraising for our organization? Guess what? You might have people who don't want to join your board after having that conversation with you. And you know what? Good. It's okay. It's okay. You don't want people on your board who are not going to participate in fundraising. That is half the job of being a board member. It's okay. You can find another role in the organization. They could make a great volunteer. They can make a great donor. They do not have to be, they can make a great ambassador. They do not have to be on your board of directors. Think we skip over the fundraising parts. We're so afraid somebody's going to say no. It's okay if they say no. It's so much better to have a smaller board full of people who are raring to go and inspired and understand what's expected of them than it is to have this large board full of people whose names look good on your website, but who are not advancing your development plan, they're not advancing your mission. So your board roles and responsibilities should have obviously the overarching responsibilities of what the board is responsible for, and then what each board member's individual responsibilities are. And make sure that you are including the fact that they have a responsibility to help raise the funds that the organization needs to fulfill its mission. This is so important to include. By the way, as Amanda mentioned when she was doing her introductions, I have some flyers that I have some samples of these documents that I've provided, and so Amanda will be providing them to you guys after when you get, I guess, when you get your recording for the presentation. So don't worry, I don't like anybody to have to do anything from scratch. We work smarter, not harder around here. Okay, so board roles and responsibilities. Board fundraising policy is the next thing that's important. So there are three parts in my estimation to a board fundraising policy. First one is the procedure for getting commitments from the board. I can recommend that you have, so first you present your development plan to the board. They have to approve it for the year. After that, the best thing you can possibly do is designate whoever it is, your development director, your board chair, your development chair, a combination of any of those people, your executive director, to sit down with your board members one-on-one. This is so important to remember. Your board members are volunteers and they are donors to your organization. They deserve to be stewarded. And so this doesn't have to be a sit down just about getting their board commitments for the year, but it should, be something that deepens their relationship with the organization. I used to meet with all my board members. We would go for coffee or go for lunch. We would chit chat. We would get to know each other. We would catch up, have great conversation. And then the last 10, 15 minutes, I'd say, all right, it's time to get down to business. I would whip out the development plan and I would say, here's the plan for the year. Let's go over it. You tell me where you want to fit in for this year. So whatever that procedure looks like for your organization, that should be at the top of your board fundraising policy. Then give examples of relational fundraising. So that could be writing thank you notes, inviting people for a tour of the facility, inviting people to come to events, finding grant opportunities. I mean, the world is your oyster because we're talking about relational fundraising. We're not talking about asking people for money, right? So there are a lot of different ways that you can participate in that. My sample document has some examples. If you want to go check out the book, the last like third of the book has board fundraising ideas in there. They're certainly not exhaustive, but it gives you a jumping off point. I think that will inspire people to, think of how they can participate in a way that feels good for them. Then it also needs to include this requirement that everyone on the board needs to make a stretch gift to the organization every year. You should absolutely put the reasons why this is important. People should know at face value why all of this is meaningful, why it is important, why you have to do it, what it means for the organization to do it. So that's your board fundraising policy. I'm trying to scoot through so we have time for questions. Then we've got your development plan. So I'm gonna just warn you, especially if you're a smaller organization, the sample plan that I've provided to Amanda is pretty extensive. The reason why I did that is because I want people to have as many examples of fundraising strategy as I could think of, but this does not mean you have to copy the plan that I gave you. This is just a sample. It does not mean that you have to do everything in there. In fact, before you sit down and make your plan, top priority, think about what you want to do and think about what you have the actual capacity to do. You do want to stretch yourselves, but you don't want to set yourselves up for failure, right? So make sure that your goals are reasonable, but still striving towards something, you know, that is greater than what your goal was last year, right? We still want to strive for growth, but we don't want to set ourselves up to with an impossible list of things there's no chance we would ever accomplish during this fiscal year. So, the first part of your development plan should be kind of a look back at the previous fiscal year, a summary of where you are, um, whether that's financially, you know, how much you raise, whether that's whether that includes any expansion of your mission that's going on, anything that you know strategically is coming up for the year ahead, you know, just a good summary of kind of what your current position is. Then you want to put your goals for the coming year. So obviously you want to have a fundraising goal, and please do not make your fundraising goal exactly what your estimated operating budget is. Also a recipe for failure. Always strive to raise a surplus for two reasons. One, it might actually not end up being a surplus. Things come up. You might end up spending more money than you think you're going to. You want to make sure that money is in the bank. You don't end up running a deficit for the year. But also, you have to think ahead to the sustainability of your mission. So you've got to think ahead towards having a rainy day fund. Um, are there going to be funds left over that, if we have enough money in our rainy day fund, that we could put into an endowment or a quasi endowment to start, you know, preparing for some sustainability, some sustained revenue from that. So this is really important. Now, when we're talking about a rainy day fund, 6 months to a year of operating budget in the bank is a great goal to set yourselves up for. It doesn't mean, I'm not saying that your fundraising goal for this year should be 50% more than your operating budget. I'm not saying that. I'm just saying start working towards that, right? Say our goal is within the next 3 years, we will have 6 months of operating budget in the bank, right? So again, think about what you want and think about what you have the capacity to do. It's okay to say you want something, but what are the steps and goals to get to that? It doesn't have to be done today. We just want to make sure we know that we want to do it. So once you figure out what your goals are, oh, so other goals, I'm sorry, got a little sidetracked. Um, so the so once you figure out what your operating goals are, so some of your other goals could be, we want to start a monthly giving program, and our goal is to solicit 10 monthly donors this year, right? It could be we want to put a program in place to better steward our current donors and start leveling people up. You know, so think about what you want your strategy to be, what your goals are. Then it's really important when you're writing your plan, make sure that you are delineating, this is work for the staff, this is work for the board, or this is work for the staff, this is work for the development committee, this is work for general board members. So that everybody knows what their roles are. This will help your board members figure out where they're able to plug themselves in. Then you also want to, as we talked about, as you're thinking about your goals, right? Think about what can we do now and what do we want to work towards in the future. So it's okay to have things on there that are several years down the road, but put that in a separate category. The other thing that you probably want to do while you're thinking about your development plan, again, that's not on here, but I always like to marry the marketing plan with the development plan, because those things are not those two jobs are not the same. I have been told they are by some board leadership before. They are not the same job, right? They're two different things, but they inform each other very closely. And so when you look at what your development plans are, you also need to look at what's the marketing strategy that's going to help us further this plan. What are the things we need to implement from a marketing standpoint that are going to help us reach these goals from a development standpoint? So those are the things. Then when you have your development plan put together, you present it to the board. When you have your one-on-one meetings, they can see right on there, right? Okay, here's a spot where you're asking for help from board members. Here's a spot where you're asking for help from board members. And also, when you're talking to your board, um, make sure that they know that if they have an idea that's not in the development plan that feels good to them and they're excited about and they want to do that idea and help raise money for the organization, don't say no, right? The answer is yes. How can I help you accomplish that? Right? Because you want people to be enthusiastic about what they're doing. And if they're excited and they're motivated, make it happen, right? Make it happen for the organization. It's important and it might change your overall strategy to do that. So the big thing, so I actually just put out I was very fortunate to have an article published in Nonprofit Pro about strategic planning and being strategic about your strategic planning, right? So one of the things that I said was make sure you have a plan for your plan. That's why we're getting so granular, right? It's not just what the goals are, but it's what are the tiny goals that are going to get us to the ultimate goal. Who's in charge of those steps each way so that we have measurables, we know what steps we need to take. We know when we go back every month at our board meeting to review where we are versus our development plan, we know how we can measure. Have we done these things? Has so and so done what they said they were going to do so that the next person can do what they're going to do? So it's really important. Make sure you put your goals on paper. That's really nice, but make sure you have the plan for your plan. Okay, so then we talked about getting board commitments, right? I am a huge fan of the one-on-one meeting. Huge fan of the one-on-one meeting. And we talked about make sure that you're personalizing. Everybody feels good about what they're participating in. And then, of course, don't just write down what their commitments are. Make sure you're following up and you're facilitating. People get busy. They aren't always intentionally avoiding doing what they said they're going to do. Sometimes life just gets crazy and they need a little push and a little prod and a little bit of support. So make sure you are giving that to them. And that's something that if you do have a development committee, those are the types of things that your development committee can take on is being that support system. Like maybe everyone on the board, on the development committee gets, depending on how many members you have, gets a couple of board buddies, that these are the people they're stewarding to make sure that they have what they need to fulfill their commitments for the year. All right, my friends, let's see what we got. Okay, so we're going to do questions and comments, but I just want to make sure you have all of my contact information just in case. The name of the book is there. If you have good news that you want to share, please send it my way. I'm really trying to make What's Good Wednesday a thing. I think we all just need a break in the middle of the week to sit and feel good about the difference that we're making in the world. So send it to Wednesday@bewhatsgood.com. Also, if you have, I do a topic of the week every week. And usually it's something that's going on with me or one of my clients, but I would love to hear if you have something that you want discussed, a question or whatever, send it my way. I would love it. Another thing, just to be on the lookout for, it's going to be a little ways down the road, but we're working on it. My husband and I have built an online tool that hopefully will streamline board fundraising completely and make this a much easier conversation. So keep an eye out for Board Raise. If you're interested in Lucia, I am actually sending a sample development plan to Amanda and she will send it to you. So you're good to go there. And if you are interested in getting the newsletter, if you want any other information from me, can head over to bewhatsgood.com. Just enter your email and be connected or email me anytime. And now, drum roll, do we have questions, Amanda?
We do. We have lots of questions. First, I want to share a ton of the thank yous that have come through the chat. Folks have been saying that this was so helpful throughout the entirety of today's presentation. And so I want to just express my thank you as well, because this was a really awesome session. There are questions that are coming through the Q&A. I'm going to take one pause of a second so that folks, if you have forgotten your question or you want to ask it, you've got this time to ask it. But let me go through and start to synthesize those different questions. Be sure to get in touch with Jamie. As you can see, she's a rock star and there's so much good information, so much you can learn from her. So take down that contact information. If you are, I saw a couple of folks, actually I saw in the question, somebody had mentioned that they're not sure how to get their board involved with a CRM and they're not sure which ones are helpful. That's kind of our shtick and what we do here. Jamie actually used to use our tool. So yep. If folks are interested in learning just a little bit more about what that looks like, I'm just going to pop up one more quick poll. If you're looking to get board involved within your tool in a really seamless way, let us know. I'll leave that there while we go ahead and take as many questions as we can. First and foremost, Jamie, let me come through and I'm going to ask Adrian's question because I think you're going to have some really good insight on this one, which is the question was, do you have any tips for organizations who already have a board who were not recruited for fundraising and don't want to do it? In short of changing the board entirely, like, is there a process or an action that can be taken that might help just shift that narrative?
Yeah, I mean, that's really tough. And I can tell you because when I came on as development director, I was just a board member that fell into that role. And we really were not recruited for fundraising. This was a very small organization that grew very quickly. Everybody was involved in the day-to-day operations of the organization. And when I came on and I started saying, everybody, aw, thank you so much, Anne. That's really kind. Sorry. When I started saying like everybody needs to fundraise, even the board chair was like, absolutely not. We didn't ask them to do this and we're not going to make them do it. And the fact of the matter is, you have to have a really blunt conversation with your board that this is what's necessary if they want to grow the organization. Like you can't spend all the time sitting around the table and deciding how to spend the money if you're not going to spend the same amount of time sitting around the table figuring out how to put the money in the bank to cash the checks, right? This is just a really important conversation. Every organization faces it at one point or another, that transition to having to be able to move into fundraising. I think the thing that helped, so there were two things that helped, and both of them were because somebody heard from an expert. So I'm just going to put it out there. If you have some great nonprofit consultant in your area, or if you just want to show them this webinar, if you want to give me a call and I can come and talk to your board, sometimes it literally just takes, or even, the itty bitty book, it's 40 pages. Like, this is what your job is. Sometimes it takes that expert. And I say it in the book because this happened to me. I had a board member who every board meeting would yell and scream about how she was not fundraising and this board should not have to fundraise. And then she read an article by an expert that said all of the things I had been saying, and for whatever reason, that light bulb switched on for her. She forwarded that email to the whole board. Guys, we got to be doing this. She did a complete 180. So sometimes it takes that outside expert to tell you, to tell the board to do it, and tell them like, okay, we're not making this up. This is what has to happen. And short of that, yeah, maybe you do need to replace your board. I hate to say that, but when your organization gets to a certain point, you've got to have people on the board who are willing to take it further. They can't just keep pushing you to grow and expand without participating in getting the funds to make that possible. So, long-winded answer, but there you go.
Thank you. Long-winded answer could probably be a whole nother presentation in and of itself.
Yeah.
to dive in on, as I'm sure this next question can be too, but it's the other end of the coin. And so I'm wondering if maybe you have like one kind of catch all answer, which is folks saying, okay, we're, now thinking about recruiting new board members. How should we shape that conversation to make sure we're recruiting them like the right way and they understand kind of this fundraising narrative involved?
Yeah, I mean, I think the first step you should take is put together your board roles and responsibilities and your board fundraising policy. Make sure you have those and those feel good for your organization, and present those to your prospective board members while you're having that conversation about them coming on to the organization. It's going to spell out really clearly what's expected of them. That's what, like when we give that conversation short shrift, and then you get them in the boardroom and you say, now we need you to fundraise, they feel duped. They feel like they got, right? You never asked me to do that. So I think it's just really important to have that conversation, but when you frame it, instead of saying like, we're going to need you to ask money from 15 people every year, right? That's not what we mean by fundraising. When you explain to people what you mean by fundraising, and when you explain it in a relational way and you say, we're going to work with you to find ways that you can participate that feel good for you, that are comfortable for you, then most people are like, oh, I can totally do that, right? Most people
Yeah.
would say, oh, I could write some thank you notes. That's like one of the most important things you can possibly do to steward your donors and bring up donor retention. And most people would happily do it, right? But if you're not approaching the conversation around fundraising in that way, that's when you get people who are like, put the brakes on and no, I'm not doing, they dig their heels in. So it's just a matter of, saying, this is what we expect of
Yeah.
you, and this is what it means.
Yeah. That makes a ton of sense and brings us really nicely to one of the next questions that came in. And it's just about these conversations, right? And that transparency. And Ron had asked if you could discuss maybe overcoming some of the discomfort with fundraising when funds need to go directly towards staff salary.
Yeah, okay, this is such a great question. And thankfully, this conversation around staffing is changing, okay? Because even the ratings agencies, a lot of them are switching from, it used to be, because I think a lot of organizations were kind of taking advantage and key staff was getting paid just exorbitant amounts of money, and people didn't like that. And I totally get that. But when you're talking about small organization, the staff is the program, right? 90% of nonprofit organizations, this, you're paying the staff to carry out the program. You can't have the nonprofit without the staff. And so
Yeah.
a lot of these rating organizations are switching now to an impact-based rating system. What is your impact on the community? And which is so much better. And I think donors are kind of following suit. And so when you have that conversation with your donors, and I used to have it all the time because where I worked, the staff was like 60% of the money that came in, and it's like, well, we're serving a lot of people. Who do you
Yeah.
expect to do that, right?
Right.
Who's doing the case management? Who is
Right.
maintaining these buildings that we have purchased to shelter these people? Who is supervising to make sure that it's a safe environment? So all of these things, you just have to explain that the
Yep.
staff, these are not superfluous people that just exist and we're paying them money to not do anything. They are essential to the implementation of the mission. And so when you are supporting staff, you are supporting the mission. You're making it possible for the mission to be fulfilled.
Yeah. That is, again, like that transparency is so key, right?
Yeah,
And having that conversation and really making them understand. And I think that's a really good point of like, well, who's going to do it, right? Like, who do you think
exactly.
is going
I
to be
just
in
think
charge?
people don't,
Yeah.
because there have been so many scandals with some of these larger organizations that do take advantage. And, so it gives a bad taste for people, but they have to, they have to
Yeah.
understand, like, so few organizations are these mega million dollar organizations. Most are small and mid-sized, and they're just trying to get their job done. And the other part of this too is if they really want the organization to make an impact on the community, the staff cannot be paid so little that they end up needing the services that you're providing, right? You've got to pay to get the right people in the door to properly carry out the mission. You have to
Yeah.
pay to get qualified people in the door. Otherwise, it's just not going to work, you know? Nonprofits are businesses. They're, you know, and we don't think of them often as such, but that's exactly what they are.
Yeah.
And no business in their right mind would go for the cheapest solution unless they wanted to get the cheapest solution, right?
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
have to think about that as well. It's about
Yeah.
what the market will bear too.
Yep. Yeah, and this is something we hear a lot too. And Kate had actually asked this question. I'm assuming you're going to have the same narrative, but the question was, is it reasonable to use our reserve funds for capacity building as well? And she said, for example, like we don't have a CRM system, we only have 2 part-time employees, so like we're looking to grow in the capacity building space.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's a certain point. I get this a lot too. It's like, oh, we want a development person, but we can't afford it. At a certain point you have to spend money to make money.
Yeah,
And so it is a little bit of a risk, but it's a calculated risk as long as you're getting the right person, the right product, that is going to help you bring in more funds. So it's worth the expense. You know, we talk a lot about the scarcity mindset, I think, in this industry. But yeah, at a certain point, you have to spend money to make money. And, you know, somebody said in there, staff turnover convinces your board that salaries are important. And I can tell you that is true because when I left my organization, it took 3 people and me to replace myself.
you're
So,
irreplaceable,
so
irreplaceable.
but it happens that way because you know the people that start out are the people that are the most invested in the mission. They're going to do the most, and until they can't do it anymore, they end up taking on a bigger job than you know what is intended. So to replace them, you end up having to
Yeah,
get you know more people to do that. So
yeah, yeah. Awesome. Well, we're a minute over time, Jamie, and I know we didn't get to everybody's questions. So apologies for not being able to get to it. There's just so much great information to cover. As you can see in the chat, everyone thought this was fantastic. If you did not get your question answered, you've got Jamie's contact information
yep.
on the screen. Be sure to reach out to her, learn a little bit more about what's good. Get on their newsletter, get involved, and we're super grateful to everybody who took an hour out of their day, hour and 1 minute out of their day today to jump on and learn from today's session. Jamie, you can see the chat.
Yeah, thank you guys so
The thank
much. You
yous
made
are
my
rolling
day.
in. We really appreciate you, and we'll see everybody at our next webinar. And hope everyone has a great rest of their day. Take care.
Bye. Thank you.